God is here. So whatever you do in the rest of this time, don't lose sight of him. His gaze will never flicker from you. As has been said, my name is Damilola. It's a joy to be with you tonight. I come from the Evangelical Alliance, as though it were a country. But yes, tonight my passport is from the Evangelical Alliance, where I have the joy of serving in our advocacy team, leading church engagement. Some of you are aware of the Evangelical Alliance, some of you are not. It's been going since 1846 as the largest unity organization serving evangelicals in this nation. As you can imagine, I have played a pivotal role from the very first day. If I were to capture the work of the EA in a nutshell, it would be working to support the church and giving a confident, compelling, and coherent witness to Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's what I love most about my job, in the parts of my job that I love, or when I'm doing something around that. And so, because that's something that's really important to us and really important to me, it is a real privilege to be in your midst as those who care about doing the Jesus stuff in a very real way, for it not just to be the practices and rituals of religious observance. You know Jesus, and you long for your campuses, you long for your course mates, you long for the world to know him. And that's kind of the only way it works when you really meet him. When you see him for who he is, you're compelled. You're compelled by what you have seen to witness it to the world. So thank you for prioritizing seeing Jesus and for so wholeheartedly throwing yourselves into the pursuit of others getting to meet him, journey with him, bow the knee to him. This is what it is all about. Tonight, in the time that I don't spend singing, we'll be looking at prayer and the link between prayer and awakening, or rather a link of sorts, an angle on the link between prayer and awakening. That's the direction of travel in general. So that's our landing point, and we'll visit a few stops on the way. I was last a student 6 years ago, and I've never fully shut the door on the prospect of becoming a student again. Not least at the moment, because the very last rail card that I'm eligible for quite some time will be expiring shortly. And I don't really know how I'm going to manage rail prices without some sort of assistance. So studying has never looked so good. Now, I got in touch with the rail car company just to work out how much time I had left, because there is a train heading for me with 30 on the front that I am somewhat terrified of. And they let me know, oh, it's okay, you have until the day before your 31st birthday to get your final rail card, and it will sail you right up until just before your 32nd one. So I don't need to cower and fare too much ahead of the 28th of September this year, which is when I turn 30. But my days of being somebody who's eligible for reductions and discounts is soon coming to an end. Pray for me. As you continue to contend for awakening and all those good things, please do spare a thought for me and the daunting prospect of becoming 30. Now, I say this as a joke. I am almost certainly going to talk to my counselor about it between now and 30, because, as is very cliche, my life in the main doesn't look like what I'd hoped it would at this stage of life. And so there's just a few things for me to process around that. For example, I am currently as single as I was on the day that I was born, and other associated concepts. So there's just a bit of stuff to work through. Now, I was chatting through some of this with a darling friend, and she prayed for me, and she prayed that the Lord would reframe 30 to my understanding. And I thought to myself, that's wild. She's a Christian and she's praying. Perhaps I should take a leaf out of her book. So I thought to myself, let me meet with the Lord around the prospect of turning 30. And so we've begun on a bit of an exercise where the Lord is reframing 30 in my understanding. And as part of that, he's drawn my attention to certain biblical characters and the role of the age 30 in their lives. So, for example, Saul, the first king of Israel, is anointed king at? David, the second king of Israel, is anointed king at? Jesus Christ, the Son of God, begins his public ministry at? It's going to be 30 every single time. Now, some of you are wondering, was the Lord trying to encourage me or discourage me with these examples? This is quite a high bar. But there is one 30-year-old whose experience has seemed that bit more accessible to me of the list of these guys. And we meet this 30-year-old in the scriptures. There's not that much backstory on him. We meet him by the Kebar River in the land of Babylon, where he is with other exiles of Judah. And like me, he has a number of metrics before him through which he can process his life, what's going well, what's going to plan, what isn't going to plan. But something happens in his 30th year that sets the trajectory for everything that is to come and also provides him with a lens to understand all that has been. That is because in his 30th year, the heavens open and Ezekiel sees visions of God. In his 30th year, Ezekiel beholds the glory of the Lord. And it is the single most significant thing about him. And as I enter into this journey for myself, I thought, why not share the fun with other people? So I'd love to invite you to consider with me tonight a few things on what it is to behold the glory of the Lord. What is the glory of the Lord? It appears to me in the main, as I surveyed the scriptures, that the glory of the Lord is concerned with two things. It's capturing two things. Number one, it is to do with the person of the Lord, something of his eternal nature being manifested. So the God that we worship in Jesus, he is triune. He is eternal. The persons of the Trinity, they are co-equal. They have always been forever. They are co-eternal. They're co-substantial. They're made of the same stuff. It's not that one of them is egg yolk, one of them is egg white, one of them is eggshell. They've got the very same essence. And our God isn't just loving. Our God is love. Our God isn't just righteous. He doesn't have a penchant for doing good things from time to time. He is righteousness. He is good. These things flow from his being. They only have meaning when they are found within him. They do not exist apart from him. Something of what it is to be confronted with the glory of the Lord is to have something of his nature come to the fore, to be impressed on you in an indelible way in a moment. So for example, Moses is on the mount and he asked the Lord that he would show him his glory. And what does the Lord cause to pass before him? Not just his acts, but his person, his goodness passes before him. The glory of the Lord is concerned with the person of God, and the person of God who it always is. Something of this eternal reality being unveiled, a curtain being pulled back, and the one who always was, who always is, and yet is to come, making himself known in a moment, in a particular way. Number one, the glory of the Lord is concerned with the person of God. And yet it appears to me, as I consider the examples in the scriptures where people have a moment of visitation with the glory of the Lord, be it Moses on Mount Sinai, John on the Isle of Patmos, Isaiah in the year that King Uzziah dies. When people behold the glory of the Lord, it doesn't just appear to me that they are stunned by his person, though that is true. There is something that sucker punches them. There's something that deals them the final blow. The glory of the Lord is absolutely to do with his person, and that also to do with his presence. Not just that God is all of the wonderful things that he is, but that God is here. That blows people's minds. That the grandeur of God, the one who is so great that the highest heavens cannot contain him. The earth is his footstool, the heavens are his throne, and yet that God is here. Blows people's minds. We see this in Jesus Christ, God in flesh. As Eugene Peterson says it, God moving into the neighborhood, God up close and personal. The glory of God is seen in the face of Jesus Christ. There's something of this, I believe, that the children of Israel encounter. Exodus chapter 4, verse 31. Moses has been sent to them to tell them, yeah, the Lord has appointed me as your deliverer. And they've had a number of questions about this for 440 years. Is the Lord real? Like, was this just like a story that's been handed out to us? We've not really felt like we've seen this manifested in the story so far. Is he real? And yet, if he's real, does he actually care about us? Because why in the world, if he's real, if all these great things are true about him, then why are we here? And yet in this moment, Moses comes before them and he tells them, yes, the Lord is, and the Lord sees you. This God who is concerned about you. And when they hear this, they bow down in worship. And they don't bow down because there's a cue that appears on the screen behind them telling them this is the moment to bow down. You know that bit that we practiced before the Lord showed up in this moment? Now is the bowing time. They don't bow down because it's a practiced ritual and they miss. They bow down because no one beholds the glory of the Lord and remains standing. The glory of the Lord, the word in Hebrew is kavod. Wait. There's something about the manifestation of God's person and God's presence that overwhelms the physicality of our being to the point that we just can't help ourselves. We have to manifest on the outside something in response to this reality that we are encountering. You can't continue business as usual when you behold the glory of the Lord. And so it's common for people to bow. It's also common for people to shake, to tremble. Because there's something in God being manifested, which is perfect love being manifested. And yet there's something of the right response to this that gives us holy fear. Perfect love casts out unholy fear, but there is a residue that it leaves behind. It is a holy fear of the Lord. Reverent awe before the one who was, the one who is, and the one who is still to come. The glory of the Lord, concerned with his person and concerned with his presence. And often people bow, shake, tremble before the glory of the Lord. And yet, to my mind, it's worth asking the question, is every instance of shaking, bowing, and trembling in the scriptures is that evidence of the glory of the Lord being manifested and the people of the Lord rightly responding to it. And we're going to survey 2 passages to work out some of how the people of God respond to the glory of the Lord, and to work out from that some of what our response is going to be. It's one thing to see something in the text. It's another thing to adopt it into your life. But I want to put before you that when you come to know a God who is so on your side as to give up that which is most precious to him in the person of his son, that you might know that that is how he regards you. So much of the question that is formed in the minds of the people of God is, does he care about us? Is he with us? Is he for us? And in these moments, he manifests himself and says more emphatically as he could, I am with you, I am for you. I couldn't be more for you than I am. When the people of God see this God who is so on their side, there is a response that is necessary. They are compelled, upon seeing the God who is on their side, to work out if they in turn will be on his side. They go from a moment of intimacy and encounter, and yet from that, they are propelled into God's mission. They meet God within their story, and yet within that moment, they receive the marching orders to take their place in his story. These are the 2 movements. They are necessary. They ought to be inseparable, but humans have devised a number of ways of separating them. And this comes to the fore because, see, the Lord, he has tendencies to want to get the maximum impact in his work in the world. And so when the Lord comes to manifest his glory, he looks for a certain kind of canvas that will most emphasize the grandeur of his being. And it tends to be the case that the kinds of situations through which God seeks to receive the most glory, the situations in which God is most glorified, tend to be those in which natural humans are most terrified. And so there comes to be a choice before the people of God. Will we cower in fear of our enemies, or will we shake in awe of the glory of the Lord? These 2 fears move in different directions. And so there comes a point where the people of the Lord, from knowing he is on their side, need to decide, will we be on his? Let's see how the people of God respond in our first passage. 1 Samuel chapter 4. I'm going to pick up the narrative from verse 12, but here's what's happening in 1 Samuel chapter 4. The people of God, the people of Israel, are surrounded by their enemies. In this passage, the Philistines. So they have an array of enemies. But yes, in this passage, it's the Philistines. They've come around them. They have some of the best of technology, military kit for their day and time. They come around the people. Now, if the people were tracking with my sermon, then they would know in this terrifying situation that they've been gifted with something, an opportunity to discover afresh the glory of the Lord, to taste and see that God is good. This is happening, that the glory of God might be manifested in their midst. That is a narrative for them to align themselves with. It's not the only one on offer, though, and it's not the one that they choose. The people are surrounded by their enemies, and they are terrified. There's one key character for our purposes in this passage. His name is Eli. He's a priest of the Lord, and we first meet him in the first chapter of this book, 1 Samuel chapter 1. We see him at work, and we see him doing a terrible job of it. He meets a lady called Hannah. She is heartbroken. She is desperately seeking a son. Eli responds to her in a crudely insensitive manner, and things pick up a little bit when she explains herself, but like he's failed pastoral care 101 in this moment by a mile. And yet, as we continue to read, we see that Eli's main problem is not so much that he's insensitive to Hannah. Eli's main problem is that he is insensitive to the Lord. And so the Lord pronounces a stark and sobering word of judgment on him, 1 Samuel chapter 2. It makes for delightful bedtime reading if you are so inclined. A stark and sobering word of judgment. There are no punches pulled. And in that word of judgment, the Lord diagnoses something. You see, it's not that Eli is not sensitive at all. There are things that he is sensitive to, in particular the whims of his son and the pangs of his appetite. He is sensitive to things. He's just got no time for the glory of the Lord. The Lord tells him, I set you apart to minister to me and to minister me to my world. And I will stand for this nonsense no longer. That's a paraphrase of what the Lord says. You can find his actual words when you read the passage. And so beyond this moment, the people of God are at war. They've gone to war with the Philistines. It's not gone well. They've taken with them the ark of the Lord. This is a symbol of God's presence amidst his people. They've taken it with them into battle because they've supposed if we do the regular religious things, then surely the Lord, our personal genie in a bottle, will do our bidding when we want him to. Because that's how this works, naturally. We've done the stuff. Now it's God's turn to do his part. And the Lord tells them through this incident, yes, you have with you the ark that is a symbol of my presence, but your primary calling was to be sight of my presence. And in you mistaking those things, you have gotten things unbelievably wrong. The people of God are defeated in battle, and from verse 12 of chapter 4, 1 Samuel, Eli is about to find out the news. A man from the tribe of Benjamin ran from the battlefield and arrived at Shiloh later that same day. He had torn his clothes and put dust on his head to show his grief. Eli was waiting beside the road to hear the news of the battle, for his heart trembled for the safety of the ark of God. When the messenger arrived and told what had happened, an outcry resounded throughout the town. What is all this noise about? Eli asked. The messenger rushed over to Eli, who was 98 years old and blind. He said to Eli, I have just come from the battlefield. I was there this very day. What happened, my son? Eli demanded. Israel has been defeated by the Philistines, the messenger replied. The people have been slaughtered, and your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were also killed, and the ark of God has been captured. When the messenger mentioned what had happened to the ark of God, Eli fell backward from his seat beside the gate. He broke his neck and died, for he was old and overweight. He had been Israel's judge for 40 years. Now, I've been quite hard on our man Eli so far. But growing up, I wondered, on coming before this portion of the text, I wondered if perhaps this was a redemptive moment in his journey. We see that he ends up dying, not so much in response to the news of how his sons have fared in battle, but in response to the news of what has happened to the ark of the Lord. And so I'm like, surely this is a redemptive thread in this guy's life. Surely this shows that there was something of right worship that was still to the core of his being. And in the times that I thought that, I thought wrong. What we see in this moment is not an example of right worship. What we see in this moment is an example of idolatry. This isn't trembling in fear of the Lord. Eli trembles in fear for the Lord. Difference of one word, and yet the difference it makes for living in God or not. Fear of the Lord is very, very, very different to fear for the Lord. Fear for the Lord is evidence that something else is clouding your vision, and there is another fear that has crept in. And now, rather than focusing the energies of your life in demonstrating the glory of the Lord, now you think you've done a good day of work at the office when you've defended the glory of the Lord. The priests of the Lord are never asked to help God. They are asked to honor him. They are never asked to defend him. He is God. You cannot defend him. The priests of God, the people of God, are never asked to defend the Lord. They are asked to demonstrate him. And getting those things twisted is no laughing matter, as Eli well attests to. His daughter-in-law pronounces over her newborn child, this is a tragic story in so many levels, but she pronounces over her newborn son as she passes away, Ichabod. Where is the glory? The glory is gone. Yes, the glory is gone. Not so much in the symbol of the presence of God amongst the people of God being captured, but rather in the hearts of the people of God being captured. And from the moment other fears were able to creep in and dictate their actions, their perspective, their way of being in the world, that was where the glory went. Because the glory of God is to be manifested within, amongst, and through the people of God. That's example number one. Example number two, let's turn a few pages or a few flicks of a screen to 1 Samuel chapter 17. And here we find a similar sort of situation. The people of God are encompassed by their enemies, the Philistines. Again, another opportunity for the glory of God to be manifested in their midst, because the situations in which natural people are most terrified, and they've got reasons to be, there's an impressive army around them. The situations in which natural people are most terrified are the very situations in which God is most glorified, when his people align with his truth. Now his people have had a number of chapters to align with their truth, and in this moment have a redo of the shocking festival that's happened a few chapters before. Do they learn from their mistakes? No. And so this passage starts off, and rather than be met with a report of the glory of God, we're met with a report of the glory of Goliath. Hear these words, 1 Samuel 17 from verse 4. Lord, I pray a grace upon your people to stay awake amidst the heat in Jesus' name. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet, and his bronze coat of mail weighed 125 pounds. He also carried bronze leg armor, and he carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with an iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. His shield was so heavy it needed a whole human to carry it. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. This is their response to the glory of Goliath. This is all they can think about. This is what is most weighing down on their perception, on their minds, on their day in, their day out. They are being taunted by an enemy, and they just can't seem to get a break, and they just can't seem to get away. The refrain in their minds is, "Oh snap, the glory of Goliath." And yet in the next verse under this, one appears on the scene, and the very same circumstances that are inspiring fear and terror in the multitude inspire courage in one. And where this one arrives on the scene and he is met with tale after tale after tale of the glory of Goliath. Have you seen his height? Have you seen his spear? Have you seen the guy who carries his shield? Again and again and again and again. Have you seen the glory of Goliath? And David responds, "Have I seen Goliath? Have you seen the Lord? Have you seen the glory of the Lord?" You've spent so much time being intimidated by Goliath's track record in battle. Have you spent any time considering the Lord's track record in battle? The commander of the hosts above, the commander of legions of armies of angels, the one whose throne is established in righteousness, justice, and truth, the one who sees in the midst of all things, the one for whom darkness is as light, the one who dwells in light unapproachable and yet is manifested in the midst of his people, the one who is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the ending. Nothing begins without his knowledge, nothing ends without his hand. Have you seen the glory of the Lord? What are you talking about? Have you seen the glory of the Lord? And so David rushes headfirst into battle where others have cowered away from it because they've just not understood in the natural how this was going to work out. And yet David says, no, it's not that I don't see what's going down in the natural. I've just got sights on the spiritual. I've just got sights on a whole different reality. Goliath, you come against me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. Goliath, in front of you right now, you see a puny teenager. But when you see me in truth, Goliath, when you look at me, because of how I have aligned myself with the truth of the God of Israel, whom you and I know in Jesus Christ, because this is the regulating vision of my life, because his glory is the regulating factor for my life. Goliath, when you see me, you don't just see one young man. Goliath, when you see me, you collide with an unseen army. David tells Goliath how his life is going to go down. It's not a pretty end for him. And that's what he gets when he boasts in defiance of the King of heaven. But not just that, because the God that we serve seeks to vindicate himself first and foremost in the person of his Son, Jesus Christ, and then through him in the lives and in the witness of his people. The way that our world is going to encounter the glory of our God in his wisdom is through us. And so the call on the people of God is to tremble before the glory of the Lord, that they might stand confident before the glory, the boast, the taunt, the intimidation of any and everyone else. Now, David is the second king of Israel. He's as second, not first. Saul is the first. 2 chapters before this, we see Saul in a military situation. And rather than be out here, woohoo, the glory of the Lord, Saul is cowering in fear of his enemy. So we see that it's not just having this position that makes one confident in God. There is a real difference between positional authority and spiritual authority. Even in this passage, Saul is king, and yet it is David who is confident in the King of Kings. And so we should ask ourselves a question. What is it that makes for the difference between David and Saul? What is it that enables David to respond to God and to engage with his world amidst the overwhelming odds before him with rock-solid confidence in God? I want to suggest to you that there's quite a few similarities between these men. They're both anointed by Samuel. They're both called by God. They both witness supernatural things. David, as he's tending to his father's sheep, saw as the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him as he goes out with Samuel and he begins to prophesy. They are acquainted with the weighty things of God. I want to suggest to you the difference between Saul and David isn't visitation. The difference between them is habitation. In a moment of visitation, the Lord grabs our attention. In lives of habitation, we guide our attention back to him. There is one that is God's sovereign working. There is another that is our faithful privilege and responsibility. This is our joy as the people of God. When he manifests his person and his presence, we now know these truths that we can hold on to. We are drawn into the reality of what always is, whether we are aware of it or not, whether the circumstances seem to support it or not, whether the headlines report it or not. We are drawn into a reality that isn't just our preference to act as a crutch to support our mental health. This is what is really real. This is what is truly true. Reality is reality from God's perspective. Truth is whatever the mouth of the Lord proclaims truth to be. Truth is not a proposition.
person. Truth is a person. This is what it is to live in reality. To live in ultimate reality is to be drawn up into the worship of heaven, and yet also to be diligent in inhabiting the worship of heaven on the earth, not just in a moment, but in a committed lifestyle. It is not unusual for the people of God to tremble in fear of other things. Neither is it a crime. It is not unusual for our attention to wander, even as beautiful as the Lord is, as glorious as he is, as wonderful as he is. We are humans, we are frail. It is normal for these things to happen. It is not a bad thing for you to need new strength. You just need to know what to do and where to go when you need new strength. Those who need new strength are not called to strategize with the best of human reasoning. They're not called to go on retreats with the best and the brightest to devise how to help the Lord to propagate his gospel in 2024 and beyond. The Lord isn't asking you to project manage his work of salvation. He's never needed your help to be who he is and to save in the way that he saves. What he's called you to in faithful participation is not defense of his glory, but demonstration. He's not calling you to help him. He's not calling you to help him. He is calling you to honor him. And the way that you manifest the eternal wisdom of God amidst circumstances and statistics and headlines that seem to defy it is when you wait. They that wait upon the Lord, they that are led by the Spirit of God, they that cultivate sensitivity to the reality of God, such that the weight of who he is bears down upon them more than anything else. They that know how to make their way back to the secret place. They that may get distracted, that may stray from time to time, but they know the way back to the secret place. They that wait upon the Lord are the ones that find new strength. They that wait upon the Lord, they that have as their main ambition in life one thing, not 25 impressive things, not even 3 things. They that have as their core ambition one thing that they desire of the Lord, one thing they seek, that they might dwell in the house of the Lord, beholding his beauty, meditating on his perfections. They that encounter God in visitation and yet devote their lives to habitation, they are the ones. They are the ones who will steward in their day and time, not just manifestations of the hand of God, as beautiful as those are. But also invitations into the heart of God. I believe the Lord wants to give us grace as we steward awakening, because to my mind, the horses have already bolted from the stable. We are amidst an awakening. It might be the early days,
cloud the size of a man's fist. But that can change very quickly indeed. So to my mind, this is not so much a moment of casting vision for prayer that triggers awakening. I believe that we will see God move in our day and time in extraordinary ways. I believe the best is truly yet to come, not just in an ultimate eschatological sense, so that is the hope of hopes, but that also with our eyes in the land of the living, we will see the goodness of the Lord. What I feel above all to impress on you is that it is very possible to steward manifestations of God's power without being acquainted with his person. And what God wants of you and of me, more than helping recruit new Christians, what he wants most is us to be enthroned on the thrones of our hearts and of our lives. That is the only way to give a truly faithful witness to Jesus Christ. That is the only right way to steward what he wants to release. God can use you without you being fully given to him. But he longs not just to use you. He longs not just to use me. He longs to have us. And part of how he has us is when we give ourselves to him in all of life. And yet this is sustained by giving ourselves to him in the place of prayer. Just before Eutychus falls out of the window, let's rise as we come to respond to the word of the Lord. This